set foot on stage for a professional orchestra rehearsal. After watching from the audience for so long, getting to play with real professional musicians felt like being invited into the inner sanctum. Usually, I'd be the one waiting to meet performers after the show, but now I had access to backstage. I experienced the rituals of the musicians going through their warm-up patterns and learned the hierarchy of when it was my turn to join in the tuning note. Then, right before the conductor gives the first downbeat, there is this suspension of movement and sound while 80 people wait to take a collective breath. I knew then that I wanted to be good enough to belong in that space. It took me a little while to figure out what my arts career would look like because I didn't have any examples of people in my own life who had done it. But collaborative performance has always given me a sense of purpose and connection with others. As I got older, that feeling only grew. All I really knew was I wanted to keep getting on stage. Well, I'm happy to report that I did in fact become a professional musician when I grew up. Throughout my Bachelor of Music program, I got to immerse myself in the world of great composers and repertoire in my history and theory books. I was lucky enough to travel with ensembles to Japan and Russia, and eventually even started getting paid to be on stage. As an audience member, I made it a point to seek out some of the world's most famous orchestral compositions on some of the world's most famous stages. Seeing The Rite of Spring at Carnegie Hall was almost a religious experience for me as a bassoonist. I play many other types of music, but one of the reasons that I love orchestral music in particular is because of the shared space that is created between audience and performers. When that downbeat from the conductor strikes, it demands the undivided attention not only from the orchestra, but from the audience as well. Unlike other forms of entertainment, when an audience member takes their seat in a concert hall, there is an implicit agreement that they will give their full attention to whatever is happening on stage. They can't take a selfie during the performance to prove they were there. They can't get up halfway through the second movement and buy a hot dog. While companies and influencers compete for 15 seconds of our attention online 24/7, there's something precious about a space where people pay to give up their screens for hours at a time just to listen. I was so happy to earn my place in that space and become a tenured orchestra member in 2008. I started adding to my own resume some of the repertoire I had studied, like Mozart operas, Beethoven symphonies, and Tchaikovsky ballets. I was excited to finally stop feeling like a guest on stage, like I had back at that first rehearsal, and to finally feel like I had arrived. But unfortunately, that feeling never came. A year went by, then 2, then 5. I had my music degree. I had some regular work. I had colleagues who respected and supported me, but something was missing. Instead of feeling like I had found my purpose, I mostly felt lost and directionless. I didn't start to make sense of that feeling until I traveled to Washington, D.C. one year. A music exhibit caught my eye at the National Museum of Women in the Arts, which is the only major art museum in the world solely dedicated to championing women through the arts. After I went through that exhibit, I started exploring the rest of the museum. I was expecting to see mostly modern visual artists, but as I started reading the dates of entire collections of works going as far back as the 16th century, I was floored. It may sound naive, but since women had been all but absent from my textbooks and the other major historical galleries I had visited, I had assumed that they had entered the art world relatively recently. As it turns out, that was a lie. It dawned on me that there were virtually no women in the list of great composers and conductors that I had studied either. I started to wonder, for the first time, how many women artists were out there that I'd never heard of, not because they were absent from history, but because they had been marginalized for centuries. Throughout my education, I had been trained to tell audiences the same perspective over and over and over again. I left that museum at closing time with a profound sense of loss. Not only had these artists been denied their place in history books and museums and popular culture, current artists like myself, struggling with imposter syndrome, were denied access to role models who looked like them. Because concert halls have the power to cultivate this attention, they also elevate the importance of the work that is presented on them. It is one thing to gain access to the physical stage as a player, but it is quite another to be represented in the music that is brought to life there. Over centuries, as popular compositions become masterworks and popular composers become musical geniuses, there are real repercussions when those concepts are synonymous with a single gender or identity. It is confusing and disorienting to hear artistic institutions say that they value the contributions of diverse genders and people of color when the repertoire performed by most top North American orchestras continues to be overwhelmingly white and male. Beethoven alone still gets more stage time than women. I enjoy playing these beloved pieces as much as anyone, and I recognize that traditions can't be changed overnight. Most of the repertoire that I'm required to teach my own students in order for them to take exams and auditions of their own is this same so-called canon that we've been playing for hundreds of years. But there are so many fascinating composers and rich compositions out there that never met the bar of a masterwork. We can absolutely give students context so that they're aware of the whole picture, and they never have to wonder whether or not they're good enough to belong because of their identity. This is where the real freedom from imposter syndrome comes from. That lack of belonging and endless push to prove yourself valuable that you feel may have nothing to do with you. If you're in a profession where you feel persistent doubt concerning your abilities, or if you're afraid of being exposed as a fraud despite your ongoing success, it's worth looking around and asking if you're truly being represented in that space at a high level. It doesn't matter if it's on stage or in a boardroom. Imposter syndrome makes us question the ways we fit in. We hide. We hesitate to apply for opportunities until a hypothetical future time when we'll be more qualified. We tend to defer to others and to think that we are worthy of praise or remuneration only if we are truly exceptional. Representation, on the other hand, gives us permission to be ourselves and to be seen as valuable now, just as we are. Once I realized that, things changed for me. I joined a group of musicians who negotiated the first collective agreement for our orchestra, including pension contributions and a pay raise, because you don't need to have your name in lights to be worthy of those basic considerations. I started a business called Artist with Abundance to help other creative freelancers develop healthy boundaries and a long-term plan for their finances, because once you believe that you are worthy of those things, the pieces can more easily fall into place. The diverse perspectives of artists have so much to contribute to help us make sense of the world that we live in. I want all artists to realize that their perspective matters so they can stop doubting themselves and start creating a career that looks like them, because there is a real need and a precedent for it. Just like I realized that it's fine for my career to look like me, sitting in the back row of the orchestra playing my bassoon. That is enough. Gatekeepers and systemic barriers do exist in every industry, though. At a certain point, they control what is seen and what is heard and what isn't. If you are a gatekeeper who cares about diversity, you have to start asking how you can create true representation for those you want to advocate for. Ask your organizations, whose stories are we telling? Whose input are we seeking? Whose voices are we hearing, and who is invisible? And in the case of the symphony orchestra, how can we use this powerful, collaborative vehicle of expression to represent more living, breathing artists and to start filling in the historical gaps of those who have been left behind? Imagine now that you've taken your seat in a concert hall and are listening to the sound of an orchestra warming up. A hush falls over the stage as the musicians take their tuning note. Then all eyes turn to the conductor as they raise their baton. The players take their collective breath before the downbeat. What we hear next is up to you.